I'd like to do this morning is to give you sort of an overview of the continuity of business planning concept and process, talk to you a little bit about our partners, give you an overview of the project, where we are and where we'd like to see ourselves headed. Mention briefly the coordination of this project with the USDA Foreign Animal Disease Prep documents, FAD-PREP. Talk to you about the working groups. Hopefully I can recruit some of you who'd like to be active participants in this project moving forward. Mention a little bit about our science-based proactive risk assessment process that's critical to many of the outcomes from this work, and talk to you a little bit about our next steps. So in the overall context of foreign animal disease continuity of business planning, this is a concept that has come into being probably in the last 5 to 6 years. Initially, as I'll mention in a minute, primarily focused on the egg and poultry meat supply as it related to high pathogenic avian influenza. We're fortunate now that some of these projects are moving into other commodity groups. There's been a small project with the pork industry and ready-to-eat pork products, and hopefully new projects coming online, broader projects with the pork industry as well as the beef industry. So the goal of these continuity of business planning projects is to promote food availability, food safety, animal health via continuity of market planning prior to, you could say, a foreign animal disease outbreak response. In this case, we're specifically focused on foot-and-mouth disease. We work to develop collaborative, multi-agency, multidisciplinary groups that involve state and federal government, industry, public, and academic partners. What we hope we come away with is some clear recommendations for decision makers, emergency response leaders that facilitate the safe movement of, and I'll put it in quotes, animals and animal products. In this case, with the SMS plan, we're focused initially on raw milk movement, which is why that's up there. But we want to facilitate the safe movement as much as possible of animals and animal products during a foreign animal disease outbreak response. And this effort is coordinated with USDA FAD-PREP documents. The newest versions came out at the end of last year. So I mentioned our academic partners at Iowa State and University of Minnesota, as well as our partners in the federal government, states, and again, most importantly, industry. That the whole concept behind this is to engage everyone in these discussions ahead of time so that we have a fairly well understood path forward with how we can eradicate a disease, a foreign animal disease like foot-and-mouth disease, without eradicating the industry at the same time. We also have been fortunate to make affiliations with a number of more regional planning efforts. While our project is focused on the national, broader scale, it's very apparent that regional and state level planning efforts are necessary to sort of fine-tune some of these requirements and some of these recommendations for the unique characteristics of the dairy industries, in this case, in different parts of the country. For example, in dairy areas where they deal with freezing temperatures, the disinfection and biosecurity protocols will need to account for that. There's unique challenges in dairy regions that have a much greater number of on-farm milk pickups per tanker, for example, in the New England region. So the active groups that we're currently coordinating with are the New England States group, the group in Wisconsin, and most recently, just earlier this year, we went with the North Carolina Dairy Biosecurity Workgroup, of Karen Jordan as a member, and participated in that. Additionally, we have also met with the Texas Animal Health Commission and members of the Texas dairy industry here in Texas, and look forward to a similar meeting in Colorado, I believe, in August of this year. So we're very open to coming to states and meeting both with state animal health officials as well as state or regional industry partners to further explain and discuss this project. So as I mentioned, it all sort of started with eggs, and in a sense, the egg industry was concerned about the way that the guidance was provided in the National HPAI Response Plan. They had concerns about the actual implementation of that plan being highly devastating on their ability to do commerce or business. And so initially there was a group formed to focus on these continuity of business issues as it related to the movements of egg and egg products. That project began probably 5 years ago now, and has recently resulted in the first document that puts forth a secure egg supply plan. So for those of you who are working in states that have large egg or poultry production, industries. If you're not familiar with this, you probably would like to be or should be, and it's accessible through the FAD Prep, the USDA FAD Prep website, which I'll show the web address of in a minute. There's several components to this. They also have the same science and risk-based approach to trying to enable as much as possible the normal movements necessary to run the industry. There is a sort of a preemptive or a preparedness plan that allows allows the industry to sort of pre-register and pre-enroll that will enable them hopefully to regain commerce more quickly if they're enrolled before an event actually occurs, as well as a specific response plan that requires a variety of different biosecurity measures in addition to testing to enable the movement of eggs. So back to milk and secure milk supply. We're organized in a way where we have a national steering committee. The national steering committee is comprised of state and federal individuals and a number of individuals throughout the milk supply chain. What the goals are in working with the steering committee is to increase awareness of the project and to leverage the expertise that we have in our participants and our stakeholders. What we ask is that the individuals who then volunteer to participate on our work groups be active in that process, because it's very important that we get as much of the information correct and get people engaged so that what we develop is as useful as possible. So our the work groups we have organized today, and this is around moving raw milk from farm to pasteurization, includes a group focused on premises biosecurity requirements or guidance, milk hauler or transport guidance, milk processing plant guidance, and as well as what we call it a matrix, but it's more of a decision tools for those involved in movement and permitting to use in the face of an outbreak response. So as I mentioned, this secure milk supply is being developed in coordination with the National Foot and Mouth Disease Response Plan, and that is available through the FAD Prep site. I guess most of you are probably familiar with that website. There's a number of different planning documents related to foreign animal diseases, SOPs, etc. that you can access through there. It does require you to request a username and a password. So within that foot and mouth disease response plan, then the goals and the aims, goals and strategic principles of a response are well laid out. And specifically, I just wanted to point out that it's fully acknowledged that facilitation of the continuity of business for non-infected animals and animal products is one of the primary goals that is put forth as part of an outbreak response. There are examples in the response plan of the time frames with which people would like to see things happen in our perfect world. And again, just to point out that, ideally we will have continuity of business plans, hopefully in place for all our industry groups. And the goal that those would be able to be quickly activated within a day of actual discovery of foot and mouth disease, to begin from day one with the mindset that we need to, maintain as much of the continuity of business of the industry that we can while we still eradicate or control the disease. So one of the challenges is that when foot and mouth disease is discovered, there will be control areas established, affected in surveillance zones, and within those zones there will be movement will only be allowed by permit, and those permits require risk assessments. And those risk assessments can take a much longer period of time than one would hope, especially when you need to make more rapid decisions in the face of an outbreak. So the goals are to work through this and do these risk assessments proactively so that hopefully we can enable science-based, more rapid decision-making during the response. This diagram is just a visual to help one appreciate the vast complexity of the different types of movements of animals or animal products that occur on and off of the dairy on a daily basis. And so initially with the secure milk supply plan, what we chose in discussions with the stakeholders was to focus first on what was considered the most critical movement for that industry, which is the movement of raw milk off of those dairy operations to commercial processing. So our initial goal is focused on raw milk movement. We have a phrase for it, we call it fast milk. We hope that on day 2, then decision makers will be able to safely permit or enable raw milk to continue to move from uninfected farms. Now, we're talking about uninfected farms in proximity to known infected farms. It is within the plan, it's very clearly stated that milk on infected premises will be disinfected and disposed of. So again, this is that same diagram, just kind of graying out all the work ahead of us with regards to looking at the possibilities for movements for other activities that surround the dairy. I think many of those will be significantly easier moving forward because many of the things, especially the vehicles coming on and off the farm, there'll be a very good framework for looking at those activities. So how does the process work? This is just sort of a flow diagram of the overall process. What we do first is, as a work group, we work with industry to identify the products of concern. So in this case, we identified milk. We work with industry then to understand the normal business process. And we're currently doing that, especially with regards to the risk assessment, trying to understand what are the normal disinfection processes and procedures for the on-farm milking equipment tanks, as well as the tankers that transport the milk. What is normal biosecurity on and off a farm or a processing plant. So then what we do is we have to develop a detailed understanding of that workflow. We work with the risk assessors who are employees of the University of Minnesota, co-located with the risk assessment team at SIA. Once we understand that, then we work with them to develop risk mitigation steps, and we incorporate those into our performance standards. And then we develop, the idea then is to have these sort of draft compliance agreements. So we're never in a position where we can stipulate or specify exactly what has to happen. What we can do, hopefully, is provide clear guidance on what would be the best way to approach doing biosecurity to mitigate the risk, and having done that, how much risk may or may not be left over. Then we communicate those with the state, federal partners, the industry, make recommendations, incorporate those into the plans that become then annexed to the foot and mouth disease response plan, and then pick the next highest priority movement for the industry moving forward. The speaker following me is going to speak in a lot more detail about the situation in South Korea, but I just thought I would put this in here just to highlight how important, we forget. We haven't had foot and mouth disease since 1929. We all hope we never get it. But if we do, it would seriously impact the way we do business, and an ounce of prevention and planning can really make or break the way that we might be able to survive something as devastating as a foot and mouth disease outbreak. So our initial assumptions in the planning process is that foot and mouth disease would be diagnosed in the U.S. There would be control areas established per the foot and mouth disease response plan. That part of that was going to be invoking movement restrictions on animal and animal products in the zone, and that dairy premises with animals that are not known to be infected based on visual inspection need to continue to have that raw milk moved to commercial processing. So another side point is that if you can't move raw milk off of dairies, then you create a very significant environmental disaster. Milk disposal is apparently a very complicated task. We're working to get a better understanding of what that actually might entail, but I think probably the safest place for this milk is at processing, and there's no reason to believe we can't move it there without undue risk of disease spread. So some of our additional assumptions are that there are SOPs worked out, operational guidance for how these vehicles can move safely from farm to processing. Those can be implemented, they can be verified, and that initially we're focused on just moving on one tanker moving from one farm to processing. We fully recognize that multi-farm pickups are the goal, and that's where we plan to move once we get this sort of single farm pickup situation. We develop some consensus and agreement over that. And we do assume that we're limited by today's technology. So there are maybe things that come along in the future that will allow us to change or update or improve these plans. So all of our biosecurity work group documents, the document for the on-farm, for the haulers, and the processing plants, all have a standard approach, and they're consistent with, except for the specific guidance for each of those activities. There's a little bit of overlap, just because of the nature of the fact that it's a continuous movement, but they are meant to sort of be standalone for those individuals most interested in that segment. Those documents have been developed. They've been through at least 2, if not more, rounds of review, and that's sort of one of the things we like to do when we go out and engage states and more regional industry partners, is we have them review those documents before we meet and then give us critique and input and feedback on the feasibility of what's being proposed. So the Movement Decision Tool and Matrix Work Group, there is an upcoming call, I believe it's next Tuesday, to discuss a number of the products that group is working on. One of the things we put forth is a way to organize our thoughts when we're looking at permitting by grouping, organizing the outbreak into stages and phases. And so it's likely that the permitting and movements what will be allowed will change over time. So knowing that up front, trying to begin with the end in mind and hopefully come up with a logical, straightforward system that will work. So we'll be discussing that on Tuesday. There will be a support manual for those individuals involved in actually making the permitting decisions around the dairy industry, recommendations for personnel waiting times between for individuals exposed to FMD and then going to uninfected premises, and recommendations for any issues related to milk recall. So any of you that are particularly interested in these issues, I'll have contact information at the end. I would invite you, if you can, to participate, review the materials, and participate in the call next Tuesday. It's a chance to have input on the outcome of what some of the recommendations will be. So this is just not meant to be read, but an example of sort of the decision matrix that we're looking to put together. So based on the location of a premise, in which area, and which criteria it meets, then the person in charge of permitting would decide, yes, product can move, no, product can't move. The idea would be to have this organized and available ahead of time. These answers are only meant to be up there for discussion. They're not meant to be what those specific guidelines would be. So product and risk assessment process is a modified OIE risk assessment process. Initially, they're focused on the risks associated with moving raw milk from farm to processing and the likelihood that any of that milk might be able to spread infection, or that the vehicle that's moving that milk, which is probably the more likely source of disease spread, could spread infection. So it's a process. I mentioned part of it a few slides ago that involves really understanding what happens on a normal daily basis and trying to identify where risk mitigation steps could be included. Their estimated time to complete this initial one for raw milk is about a 9 to 12 month period. So right now, as I mentioned, we're focused on trying to take the work that we've done to date out to get increased socialization, awareness of the project, input and feedback, and trying to come to consensus essentially on what those performance standards will be in order to enable that raw milk movement. So in summary then, I mean, we know that dealing with a foot and mouth disease outbreak will be incredibly complex. The dairy industry, all of our animal industries are very complex. And so, without really looking at the nature of these movements and how some things may or may not safely be enabled during an outbreak response, without doing that ahead of time, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to do that well in the face of an outbreak. So this process requires, open communication between all the partners that are involved to try to come up with a consensus approach as far as what would work to enable the business continuity. So, and I'd be happy to email this presentation or a summary. I have like a one-page summary of the project. Maybe I could share with Karen and we distribute to the committee as well. But each of us sort of take a different role in leading the different biosecurity work groups. And as I mentioned then, there's also the decision matrix work group that I co-chair with Dr. Roth at Iowa State. So we do have a meeting next Tuesday, and again, for those of you interested, I'd really welcome your participation and input. So I also was asked to make a few comments about bulk tank screening for foot and mouth disease. So, and I won't steal Dr. Becken's thunder because she's going to be talking about agricultural screening tools. So I just have a few short comments. And first, there is currently no validated assay, but there certainly has been work done in this field before, and I think it's reasonable to expect that optimization of existing assays can be done in a fairly reasonable amount of time, and that these tools could be made available. So there are projects under consideration right now that would help this move forward, so that we would have these tools, potentially taking a 2-year time frame. But from the perspective of continuity of business planning, we have to plan with the tools and technologies that we have today. So currently, we're not writing into the decision matrix the fact that we have a test, because if we say we have a test and we have an outbreak tomorrow and we don't have a test, then that kind of curtails any utility that pre-planning might have. So we have in the back of our head that we hope we have a test really soon, but right now we have to plan with what we have. So one of the things, what can we do now? What can states and regions do now to put themselves in a position where if we have a bulk tank screening test for FMD, we actually have the system in place to support using it. So a test is only one part of the system. You also have to get the sample, have the sample properly identified, get it to the laboratory, and have a means of reporting those results quickly so that decision makers can make the best informed decisions possible. So one project that is currently underway is being led by a dairy food safety resident currently working at the California Animal Health and Food Safety Lab in collaboration with the California Department of Food and Agriculture, is basically putting that strategy together. Putting a strategy together in the state of California for the different options that exist for the collection of bulk tank milk samples. There's a variety of different ways that they can be obtained. They're obtained routinely for the normal testing that goes on in the industry, components testing, quality testing, also other regulatory tests. And this system, I think it's important to point out, this isn't just a system for an animal health emergency or foot and mouth disease. This is an infrastructure that could be useful for a wide variety of food safety emergencies. Feed contamination was just the recent incident with the concerns about radiation in the milk supply. So if there was a need or a desire for the industry to want to screen a certain amount of milk representing a region, then they would have a system in place to rapidly coordinate the acquisition of those samples in industry and get them to the laboratory for whatever type of testing people deemed was necessary.